Welcome to our First Leaders Network, guys. It's good to see everybody, kind of see, not really see, but see on the computer. This is our first session for the new school year, and we're glad to see everybody. I see we still have folks trickling in. We're recording this session, and you will have access to all the links as we continue going through the slides. So welcome, and welcome to the new school year. So we do have a bit.ly. Rachel has put it in the chat box already. If you would like to follow along on your own computer within the presentation slides, you just need to click on that or put that address in your address bar in your browser. You will probably want to do that. We have a lot of resources today to share with you and live links. And when you go back, you can just click on those and you won't have to worry about writing anything down. So make sure that you get the slides. I'll give you guys a minute to get the slides up and going. And then in a minute, I'm going to throw it to my colleague. I'll give you guys another second. And it's in the chat. All right, Mike, my colleague Mike is going to start us off this morning.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start today's meeting with a little icebreaker. Anyone that knows some of us here at SST8, especially Heidi, she loves music. And we're lucky enough to be office mates where we just talk about music all the time. So that was kind of the inspiration for today's icebreaker is, what is your music mood? So what we have here is we have in the chat, I'm just going to put it in there, the bit.ly for that. And we also have a scan. If you could take out your smartphone device, we have a poll that's been created. We want you to choose the type of music that describes your mood today, or you could just simply choose the type of music that you prefer. And your choices are Take Me Down to PBIS country. I want to dance when I think about PBIS. Pop music always lightens things up. Let's rock with SST8. Rap and hip hop music is my positive intervention. Easy listening puts me in the right mood. I'm all about encouraging positive behavior and all that jazz. Classical music suits me. Or, and this is a shameless plug for our 8 with 8 podcast, never mind music, podcasts are more rewarding to me. So if we could cast our votes using either the scan or the bit.ly to get you on your device, or you could do it on your computer, we will have the results of that poll at the end of today's session. So give us a little bit of insight to what your musical mood is. Thank you.
And I'll leave that slide up for a second before we move on. Mike's got to do a little manipulating of the results, so we'll show the results at the end to see where we are. I know what my favorite is, and I know what I'm hoping for, but we'll see what your moods are today. Okay, well, today's agenda, you can see on your screen, is that we are, I'm going to throw it to Stacy to share with you this morning, and she's going to tell you what we're going to cover. Good morning, Stacy.
Morning, Heidi. Thanks. So as usual, we just want to let you know the updates, what's going on in the world of PBIS and, of course, Restraint and Seclusion. There have been some new resources shared, and so we want to make sure that you're aware of those. And then we're going to take a look at some TFI items and what are the trends across our region. Where are the areas that we continually get some questions and need some input on? So we want to share those out with you. And then we're going to talk about future topics. Where would the network like to go? We want to take a look today at classroom practices and then also some TFI components, and really just get your input to see what would you like to, what direction would you like to take for the network? And so we'll be sharing a link at the end also to get your feedback on that. So that's kind of an overview of our agenda for today. And then I just have a brief article I'd like to share with you as well as we get started. I came across this article called Why a Positive Phone Call Home is Worth the Effort. And it's just a couple page article from Edutopia, and it just really aligned so well with PBIS. And one of the things that talked about was that we know that research shows when teachers raise that ratio of praise to reprimands, acknowledge the behavior we want, it dramatically improves, the behaviors we want. It also improves on-task behavior of students. And if students are on task and engaged, there's less behavior, but then there's also better academic outcomes. So again, just that simple connection has such a positive impact. And one of the things the article drew attention to was that these positive interactions tend to decrease the older students get. And the authors said they found it really sad that most of their colleagues said, I don't ever remember getting a positive call from the school for my children. And that caused me to pause and think. I have 3 children. My oldest is a senior in college. My youngest is a sophomore in high school. And honestly, in all those years, I've only received 1 positive phone call. And that just made me stop and think, I remember who called me. I remember what they said. And I remember the impact that that had on me. So this article just gives 7 tips for how could you put this into practice so it's not so overwhelming. And they're very simple, but I thought they were really good. And the first one I thought was so important is they asked the student for input at the beginning of the year. If I'm going to make a phone call home, what would you want me to know? So that gives you that first connection of a relationship with a student, and then gives you just some insight into, who would they even want you to call? That was one of the things they asked, because the student doesn't always say the parent. And that's pretty telling if you're asking that information. And then they just gave you some real simple things to think about. How could I organize a schedule of what I'm going to do? How would I keep track of that? They even recommended coming up with just a 3-sentence script of what you would say. So again, it makes it an easy process for you to do. And one of my favorite pieces, what they highlighted on here, is when you do this, you make sure that no child is invisible in your classroom. And, I just think how many kids are walking through the doors of school and they feel invisible. And so just this simple act of having that process of, I'm going to talk with kids, I'm going to find out who they'd want me to call, I'm going to come up with a schedule, and I'm going to make a positive call home before I ever have to make a negative call home. It does so much for the relationship with the parent. It directly impacts child engagement in your classroom and just has overall benefits. So again, it's just a super short article with some really helpful tips. So we just wanted to share that out with you. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Frank.
All right, good morning, everyone. I get to discuss a little bit about the PBIS Restraint and Seclusion rule and law. And I know everybody's so excited to hear those components of it. But in this slide, we do have captured some direct links to some kind of like a little bit of a cheat sheet, some kind of basic things, components that you want to make sure that you're including throughout the year. So just as to recap some of those important parts, make sure at this point in time, we have a written policy and procedures for implementing PBIS and the use of restraint and seclusion inside of our buildings and district. You want to also, this one comes up quite often too, ensure a support plan is in place for substitute teachers. So in this case, a good rule of thumb or a good thing to do is just, do you have something that introduces PBIS to your substitute teachers, or where they can go for additional support and help in certain situations? So as the substitute walks in your building, do they receive something? Do they know who to call, how to interact? Do they have the matrix? Do they know what to do in key situations? Also, establish procedure for monitoring and implementing in the PBIS and restraint and seclusion law. Provide PD and on PBIS to student personnel at least 3 years, and ensure that's continuous and training and coaching throughout the buildings. So it is every 3 years, make sure everybody, not just certified staff, is being trained in our PBIS. Also, the appropriate number of staff are trained annually in evidence-based crisis management and de-escalation strategies. So you'll see that many districts have their CPI or MANT training, and building teams have those small groups of people that are trained in that. Hopefully they can use many of the de-escalation strategies and not so much of the restraint seclusion aspects of it. The maintaining of documentation, many people can do this through your LPDC, the training itself. And now to get into a little bit more with the restraint aspects, after you've restrained it at a third time of restraining a child, the meeting which must occur within 10 days of that restraint, and at that meeting with the parents and the group, you're going to determine, is an FBA, functional behavior assessment, needed, or in some cases, the students that currently have an IEP, does that FBA need to be amended? So the IEP team will meet. If it's a student with a disability, if it's a student that is not, you'll comprise your team that's most beneficial to conduct that FBA. Also, if there is an incident that requires restraint or seclusion, it has to be reported immediately to the building administrator, parent, and documented. And that needs to be communicated to the parent within 24 hours or less, immediately or within that 24 hours. All right. Next
And
slide,
Frank,
please.
I would just add also that the top link there is a checklist. I believe that's the checklist link. And for those of you who sat on the network last year, there was a really long discussion about, could the state give us a checklist about what we need to do to be compliant with this particular rule. And I really feel the reason why this resource came out is because Region 8 asked for it last year. That's not what was told to me by the department, but we had a long conversation at one of our network meetings last year about, could we get something that would break it down very simply for us? And I really think this was in response to that request. So thank you for those of you who were on the network last year that asked for this. I think it's a great resource. It makes it, the components of the rule are very complicated, and I think this makes it very digestible. So thank you, Frank, for reminding us of all those important components.
And also on that is also a link to additional modules for restraint, seclusion, PBIS modules that were created by the Ocali partnership with OD, correct? Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, next slide. So here are some great resources. They're new resources for you that I would encourage you to take a look. The wellness kit in here, there's some great breakdown for students, for families, for the community, for teachers, for administrators, and you're addressing some different aspects from mental wellness to PBIS resources. In fact, one of the resources in there kind of speaks about empathy, and there was a recent study where they looked at empathy. They trained teachers in empathy about 2 months apart. And when they trained those teachers in empathy, they noticed a decrease in suspensions by 50%. And the students that were suspended previously had a noticeable understanding and seeing that the staff that were trained in empathy had a greater relationship with them. So, empathy is included in there. Also, you have stay in the game. That's more of our attendance base and kind of decrease chronic absenteeism across the state. This is a huge focus for us this year. I know many districts are working on the chronic absenteeism. Inside that, you can see, I believe that's working with Proving Ground and the Harvard Institute. If you sign up for it, if you don't sign up for it, there's plenty of resources such as videos from professional football players, many of them the Cleveland Browns. I'm sure other states have other athletes in there, but make a shameless plug for hopefully the Browns win today. But that's a great resource to use. You can use that as a tier 1, where everybody's taking a part of it, or there's also some tier 2 and tier 3 strategies in that as well. The threat assessment, here the department invites all Ohio districts and schools to participate nationally in this recognized comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines. So you can sign up, go through that process, and kind of determine what are our needs as a building, and kind of make decisions moving forward. And then here's a great article, Teach by Design. This is one that I believe for PBIS apps, Heidi included for us. And if you get a chance to read through it, really breaks down, some different components, how to prevent the big 5, and being predictable, engaging, welcoming. We know when we sit there, if a child wants to come in our class and they enjoy coming in our class, we have a chance to teach them. If they don't, if they hate coming in our classrooms and they don't want to be at school, we don't have a shot. So kind of talks about 5 big ones, and being self-aware. The instructional practices are also included that one. So that's a great little article that was included. Advance one more slide. And then we also have the PBIS high school think tank meetings. Here's just some information on that. That is created by the Association of Positive Behavior Support, APBS. And, this is something I know many high schools, really would ask for more specific networking opportunities and to build out, because high school does look a little different. How does PBIS work at the high school level? And so the more we can, network with other schools, the better off we're going to be.
Okay, thank you, Frank. All of those resources I think are great. And I think they are really timely. That high school think tank I'm really excited about because, high school, when you're implementing PBIS in high school, it is a unique animal. And so this is an opportunity for folks from around the country to get together just for an hour to kind of just problem solve. And the folks that went on it last year and participated spoke very highly of it. And they really felt that it was worth it, that hour of time. So it's free. You just need the link. You don't need to register. It's really kind of cool. I'm going to try to get on as many as I can this year. I can't get on all of them, but I think it's going to be more good information for our high school PBIS implementers. The last update we wanted to share with you guys is the information that's being reported on the state report card. We're getting lots and lots of questions about why buildings and or districts are receiving a yes or a no on the state report card for PBIS implementation. So we wanted to just remind you that there is I don't want to call it a rubric, but there's a rating scale that what we recommend is school building teams report as to where they are in PBIS implementation. So if you're looking at your screen, you'll notice there's an A through F rating that each building needs to report at the end of the year through EMIS. And then based on those ratings, the district gets an overall rating of a yes or a no. So we have been getting questions specifically as to why did our district receive a no for PBIS? And probably the reason, if you see where that blue arrow is, probably the reason would be for last year's data, 2021-22, you would receive a yes when all of the buildings have either a C, D, E, or an F rating. They've rated themselves. If any of the buildings have rated themselves, a D, E, or F. If any of the buildings rated themselves an A, B, or C, even one building within a district, that would throw that state rating to that question to a no. So I know several people have reached out to me and said, well, I know we're implementing, but why did the district get a no? One reason could be that the rating was not submitted, possibly, or the other reason was that it was not a D, E, or an F for one of the buildings. You'll notice for next year that it rises a little bit as far as implementation is concerned. They're looking at buildings to be at an E or an F, which would be full implementation or innovation and sustainability. And that will work the same way next year. The district will get a yes if all buildings are at least E or F. If any of the buildings are lower than that rating, they will receive a no for the district. So there is I did not put the link there, but if you go to ODE's webpage and just search PBIS report card, you can find this webpage and it'll give you more information, or you can reach out to your SSTA consultant. But this is how things are being rated. And the reason why we go through 2022-23 next year is that's the way the legislation was written. So they're expecting everybody to be at full implementation or innovation and sustainability by next school year. I will tell you as a PBIS coach, that is probably not going to happen for most buildings. That is not reality. And I probably shouldn't put this on a recording, but I just don't see it happening for most buildings to be at those levels. If people are reporting it, I would say try to be as honest as possible and as reflective as possible with your process. I just don't see our region or the state for that matter, where all buildings are going to be at that E or that F rating. So right now, most of our districts are receiving a no in that category. And I assume that it is going to be the same next year. but it's just not, PBIS is a framework that takes 3 to 10 years to implement. I don't think the legislators really realized that when this legislation was put into place, because I just don't think we're going to have folks that are going to be at that level by next year. So just, that is how that is calculated. Like I said, if you guys want more information regarding that, please, you can consult the ODE website, or you can reach out to one of us. And Stacy just put the link in the chat to that page specifically if you guys want to look at it. So we're going to kind of pivot now and talk about some of the regional trends that we're seeing as far as TFI and looking at some data for the region. So for those of you that were involved last year, we did our SSTA team, and thank you team, we did a whole slew of TFI assessments in the spring, both for recognition purposes as well as for people just kind of checking for fidelity. And there are a couple of trends that we saw across our 3-county region. And those you'll see on the screen right now. 1.8 is one that we are probably would really like to focus on for our network this year, because it is pretty consistent across our region that 1.8 is not receiving a 2. And in some cases, lower than that across the region about PBIS being implemented in the classroom. So that is one thing that we're seeing as trend wise, that we're seeing a lot of, schools not really reporting on that TFI, that the classroom practices are being implemented with fidelity in the classrooms of PBIS schools. We're gonna do a little bit of a deeper dive into that in a minute. But the other 2 things that we're noticing as well is that data piece, really making sure that you're using data to drive your decision making and defining your problems with precision. There is kind of an art to constructing a precise problem statement, and we're not seeing that in a lot of the notes that are being shared with evidence as we kind of collect that for recognition. So that data-based decision making, where you come up with that precise problem statement, we're seeing a trend there. And then the last one, where historically, since I've been in this position, I give a lot of coaching to, is that evaluation piece. In other words, how do we know that our tier 1, 2, and or 3 is really working for us? How are we evaluating what we're doing? How are we changing what we're doing? How are we sharing those results with our greater community and our stakeholders? And that typically is one that just about every team I work with could use a little bit of growing in. So those are the 3 things that we're seeing regionally. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into those classroom practices right now, but just for your knowledge, as you guys are going through those are things that we're going to hopefully be coaching on and paying particular attention to, because we're seeing some areas of growth in those areas. Teaching, showing your signage, your lesson plans. For the most part, you guys are knocking it out of the park there. It's just these areas we want to tighten up a little bit for, and acknowledgement systems too is another one that people are doing a really nice job with. It's just these 3 areas that we want to kind of focus on for this year, and particularly the classroom practices. So we have a really short video clip to show you. I'm going to warn you, when it starts, the music is really loud. And I didn't do that on purpose, because I like music, as Mike said. It just starts really loud. So just be aware if your speakers are up. But this is totally in alignment with what we found our needs are in the TFI, as far as how can we sustain PBIS? It's some of the same reasons that we're seeing areas of growth. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to kind of dive into that. So just be prepared. As soon as I hit play, it's probably going to be a little loud, but the 4 considerations here by Kent McIntosh are absolutely phenomenal for your PBIS teams.
Hi, we just completed a research project funded by the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. We were looking at what educators at the school, district, and state can do to sustain evidence-based practices like PBIS. We were lucky to get information from individuals in 860 schools and follow them for 5 years to see what really made a difference in terms of sustaining or abandoning PBIS. So I want to share with you really quickly 4 tips that our research identified as most important to sustaining PBIS, and then 4 checks to see if you're on the right track. Number 1, keep a strong team. You know, one superhero educator might be able to get PBIS in place for a school, but one superhero cannot sustain it. You got to implement as a team, share the load, and keep things alive, especially when people move on from the positions they're in right now. So here's a check to see if you've got this in place. Think about your school right now. Is there one person that if they left, maybe even you, the systems might disappear? If so, you got to make a plan right now to get that person to share their knowledge and share their tasks across the whole team, as opposed to just relying on one person. Also, keep bringing new people onto the team, especially people who are new to your building. New people bring fresh ideas. Number 2, use your fidelity of implementation data to improve your systems. Measure fidelity at least once a year, and preferably a few times throughout the year, so you can keep checking on that progress. Remember, the goal isn't to get 100% on these measures. The goal is to find out what can be improved, so you can make sure that you're implementing the critical features that are most likely to improve student outcomes. So here's another check for this one. You should always know what your next step in implementation is on your action plan. If all you know what your score was, you don't know what to do to keep improving. Number 3, use your school discipline data. There's a big difference between simply collecting your data and then actually using it actively for decision making. You can use your information to identify patterns of negative interactions in your school and change the environment to help students be successful in that specific area where you're having difficulties. So here's another check. When was the last time you shared your school discipline data with all staff in your school, like at a staff meeting? Our research found that schools that shared discipline data with all staff at least monthly were more likely to sustain PBIS than others that didn't, even if the team was doing a really good job with using data for decision making. And then the last one, implement PBIS in the classroom. Our research showed that the strongest predictor of both sustained implementation and sustained improved student outcomes was implementation of classroom PBIS systems. So here's your final check. Think about how much of the school day your students spend in the classroom. If your school does a great job with PBIS in common areas, like the hallways and the cafeteria, but you don't work together to implement PBIS classroom systems, then your students are not going to a PBIS school. So to sum up, if you want to keep PBIS going strong in your building, your best bets are to keep a strong team, collect and use your fidelity data, use your school discipline data to improve your systems, and implement in the classroom. Thanks so much to the teachers and administrators who made this research happen and are working every day to improve outcomes for students.
Okay, so that's our buddy Kent McIntosh from the University of Oregon. Some of us have had the pleasure of seeing him speak or present. He's absolutely fabulous. And I think the research that they have found through the University of Oregon and the studies that they've done is really important, because we know sustainability is such an issue with anything that you do in your school. But I thought it was particularly poignant that they had found that the data pieces, the fidelity pieces, the team pieces, and then of course this classroom aspect is so important to make sure that is happening in your schools, to make sure that we sustain and grow PBIS. So, you know, historically in Region 8, when we do PBIS training, we really focus on that school-wide, at least for the school age, we focus on that school-wide. And that school-wide is your common areas, your system, your data collection, all of that kind of stuff. But what we don't cover in that first PD are really the classroom practices. So that's something that we also train on, but it's a separate training because there's so much to do when you get involved with establishing your system that it's kind of like layering on a whole other system when we're talking about classroom practices. So we want to just bring your attention to the fact that at least at the school age, and Michelle in a minute is going to talk about some early learning considerations, but at least as you're rolling out your PBIS framework, do you know if it's happening in the classrooms? And at a school age level, we talk about 8 different classroom practices that are effective to make sure that we know it's happening in the classroom. The first 4 are on your screen, and the first 4 should look pretty familiar to you if you're implementing school-wide with consistency. And that is your expectations and rules. We know we have common area rules and expectations. We know we have that established. We know we have lesson plans, but are teachers setting up their classroom rules in alignment with what the building is doing? Do they have their own matrix, for example? Do they have their own anchor charts? Do they have their own procedures and routines for what's happening in the classroom that is aligned to the PBIS framework? Also, are they encouraging expected behavior? Are they participating in your school-wide acknowledgement system? Do they have their own that they use? We would always encourage that they participate in the school-wide before having to develop something of their own, but are they using it? Are they acknowledging those behaviors in the classroom? And then do they have that continuum of how to respond to challenging behaviors when they occur? Most of you should have your flow charts that say this is what happens when unexpected behavior occurs. These are the steps that we take, but are teachers using them in the classroom, and do they have their own procedures for handling those unexpected behaviors in the classroom? Each one of these elements or effective practices actually is a direct link. If you have the bit.ly slides, will take you to a nice little, it's from the University of Missouri PBIS, and it's a nice little check that teachers can use in their classrooms that have what the practice is, am I doing it, and here is what it looks like, and here is what it doesn't look like. So once you're looking at these slides, you can click on each one of these practices to see actual little teacher tools that teachers can use, or you may want to consider using them at your PBIS team meetings as well. The last 4 are on your screen. Opportunities to respond, that is teacher time less than teacher talk time less than student talk time? Do kids have an opportunity to respond multiple times during classwork and the things that you're doing in class? And there's a nice little check there for that one. Active supervision, do we really know what that looks like? I think we say that, but do we know what moving, scanning, and interacting with students looks like? And that's really important. You can't sit behind a desk and be effective in a classroom. You have to be moving around with the students. The last 2 there are the activity sequencing and choice, and the task difficulty considerations are really about how you sequence your instructional tasks in your classroom. Are we setting up tasks that kids can build their behavioral momentum or move through easily? Do we give kids choice? Because that's a very heavily research-based intervention. Are we really setting kids up for success when maybe they don't particularly like to write? Are there other modes that we can give them so that we don't see behaviors occur? So really looking at all of these 8 practices are crucial in knowing if PBIS is being implemented in the classroom. And there are many, many tools that will kind of, the first few on these slides, but there are other tools at the end of this network meeting that we're going to share with you that your PBIS team might want to look at. Because if you're doing all this great stuff in your common areas, but things are not getting to the teacher level, you really can't say that you're doing PBIS Tier 1 with fidelity. The other thing is, if you still have, and I know this is still a hot topic, if you still have teachers using clip charts, that is not a PBIS practice. And we know that it goes against the ideology and the practices in the PBIS framework. So I know I'm still working with some teams on trying to get rid of some of those practices because they're not PBIS practices. And there was a time that I think people thought they were, and they used them all in good faith. But we know now from research that they're really not, they're good PBIS practices. They're kind of against what we talk about in the framework. So those are the 8 for school age. Michelle's going to kind of talk a little bit about what we would consider for our youngest learners, which are very similar, but some special considerations for our youngest learners.
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. So we've included on this slide a link to a really nice one-page resource that outlines the 5 classroom practices that should be in place from an early childhood perspective. And with early childhood, one of the biggest differences that we always work with teams and focus on is that most behavior is classroom managed when you're looking at preschool and even kindergarten. At this age, kids are learning social skills. Teaching should be at the forefront of everything you're doing to support behavior within that classroom. And this really nice visual gives that emphasis where it should be, which is on those teaching practices. So you'll see the 5 listed here on the slide. The first being that 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative attention that kids are receiving. And when Stacy was sharing that great article on that positive call home, that feeds right into that 5-to-1 when you're thinking about families and supporting those positive behaviors that you're seeing kids show you within those classrooms. So that 5-to-1 is really important. 2 and 3 are really focusing on predictable schedules and routines in early childhood classrooms, and not just having them listed up on the board, but are there visuals in place down at a child's level so that they can access those routines. Number 3 talks about establishing routines within routines. So not just that you have a schedule for the day, arrival, small group, circle time, but that you have visuals to support what each of those individual routines look like. So during circle time, do you have visuals to support what the routine during circle time looks like for young children? And then 4 and 5 are looking specifically at teaching. Are you teaching those behavioral expectations? Safe, kind, respectful, responsible, ready to learn, using visuals? And are you teaching peer-related social skills, sharing, turn-taking, problem-solving, using language to ask, following directions? All of those pieces, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds need explicitly taught, not just once during the day, but across all the routines that they experience. Transitions to the bathroom, out on the playground, all of those pieces are setting them up to be successful when they get into that school age environment. As I said, there is a link to this really nice one-pager. I see a couple of our preschool early childhood PBIS leads on this call that I know have used this resource. A couple of the teams that we've taken through Tier 3 training with the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce process. One of the first pieces that we focus on is we go back to those Tier 1 classroom-based practices to make sure that these pieces are in place. So this never goes away. This is always at the foundation of what classrooms should be looking at if they see a spike in behavior happening.
Thanks, Michelle. And I would argue those
Yeah,
are good at any
absolutely.
age, even high school. And they're very similar to what we talk about in school age. They're really kind of the same things. It's just kind of laid out a little bit differently, but I would say any of those are good for kids pre-K 12 and probably adults as well. I would say that that's when I'm off my schedule and routine in my house, things are probably not good for anybody around.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think those are good life lessons all the way through, for sure. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we wanted to share a couple of other resources, and I know we've kind of thrown a lot at you today, but there are so many good things out there. You don't have to use all of them, but I would rather give you guys more than you need, and then you can cherry pick what you want. I would rather give you more so you have options. So in addition to the resource that Michelle shared with the early childhood practices, those 5 considerations, and then in addition to those teacher tools that are linked on those other slides, here are some other good resources that you guys can look at as far as classroom practices. Again, I think these are good for your PBIS leadership teams to look at to see how could we use these in our schools. The first one is one of my very favorite resources for classroom practices. It's kind of a one-stop shop brief that talks about all of the things that should be happening in a PBIS classroom. It has little checks the teacher can take. It has scenarios that you can read. It has a nice flow chart of how this all the stuff works together. It has secondary and elementary examples of what these classroom practices look like. It's really a nice one-stop shop with, if you want to have something that has everything in one document, that first one is fantastic. I just really, really like it. It comes out of OSEP, I believe, from Ideas That Work, and they are ideas that work. I would absolutely say that. The second one, actually, and I think Jessica Haynes is on the call, she found this one and introduced it to me, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. This is another federal funded resource that is a website that is directed at either administrators, coaches, like behavior coaches, or teachers, and it's called the Classroom Checkup. All you have to do is go in and sign up. It's free, but that you have to create an account. But there are resources in there. There are fidelity checks in there. There are training materials in there. There are all kinds of things that support all of the classroom practices that should be happening. This is my new favorite resource for classroom. It's really, really fantastic. And it's free. You just have to sign up with an account. If you are a coach or an administrator, I think these give you some really nice resources that you can use for teachers either that are struggling, teachers that want to work on classroom management, teachers that want to get better at providing that 5-to-1 ratio, all of those kinds of things. There's just so many great things in that website that I encourage all of you to take a look at. And teachers can use it on their own too. They can go in and sign up as a teacher. And then the last one comes to us from PBIS apps. It's called the B+ app. And basically it is a free app that you can download on your phone, Android or Apple. And it prompts you for that positive feedback that you're giving to students. So it helps you track, are you getting to that at least 5-to-1 ratio that Michelle talked about? Are you providing enough feedback on the behavior? Because what we know from research is that teachers generally are pretty good about giving feedback on academic skills. They give a lot of feedback on academic skills, but where we see the research very clear is that we're not giving enough feedback on behavior. So this is one way that if a teacher has their phone in their pocket, this is something else, and it's also free, that they can, it'll prompt them to really make sure that they're giving that 5-to-1 feedback to students on their behavior. And really, really like that. So if any of you guys are familiar with doing the TFI or doing the SAS or using Swiss, this particular app comes from the same folks that do all that. So those are some other resources that we would like you to kind of check out to see if maybe your PBIS leadership team could really look at, are we implementing these practices in our classrooms with fidelity? And these are great resources for you. So I love all of them. My newest favorite is that Classroom Checkup though, because it's new and it's really kind of slick. So the last thing that we're going to talk about that Stacy indicated is that we're going to talk about what are our regional needs for our network. We want to be responsive to your needs. One of the things that we think we need to continue to talk about are these classroom practices. But there might be other things in addition to that that you want to talk about at these network meetings. So we're going to give you a minute or so to take the regional needs survey. It is a Google survey that's going to ask about what needs do you think, or what topics do you think we need to cover at these meetings? Because we have, I think, about 4 more for the rest of the year. Our last one will again be in person. Last year we did a panel. Discussion panel, which was really very favorably reviewed by everybody that attended. But we want to know what for these next, definitely for these next virtual meetings, as well as for that last in-person meeting, what are your needs? So if you have the bit.ly and you're looking at the slides, you can click directly to that survey there. The other thing in that survey that we're asking is, would you benefit from a tier 2 network? So for those of you who are implementing tier 2 or beginning to implement tier 2, I think teams are starting to realize that tier 2 really can be a beast. It is a system within a system, and it is not as cut and dry, I think, as sometimes as folks think. So one of the questions in that regional needs survey is going to ask, would you like to have a network that is just going to talk about tier 2. We know, especially Michelle and Stacy and I, there are some differences in early learning, early childhood considerations, as well as school age. We know that people who are implementing tier 2 is that it's a little more complex than I think folks think. So is there a need for us to get together, and it could be quarterly, maybe 4 times this year, once a quarter, even online, online or in person, whatever you guys think is best, but to really talk about what do these tier 2 practices look like. So there's a question about that. And then there's a question about anything else that you think we might need to talk about at our network meeting. So we're going to give you a minute to do that. But before you do that, I want to talk about the Ashland Credit Bundle. For those of you who are unaware, the Summit ESC offers a bundle for credit. And basically, they have one specifically for those of you who are attending networks. So if you're planning on attending this network all year, and then you might be attending, some of you might be attending the MTSS for Equity Network. I know some of you are planning on attending our Leaders Network, our Illuminating Leaders Network, and anything else that either SST8 or the Summit ESC offer. You can take your contact hours from each of those sessions and bundle them toward Ashland credit. So we wanted to throw that out to you. Now, this network, if you would attend all sessions, it would not be enough for the 1 credit. You'd probably have to pair it with another network, but we wanted to let you know that that is available. If you're planning on coming to these network meetings and you accumulate enough hours, which I think is about 12 or 12 and a half, you have enough to purchase an Ashland credit through Summit ESC. So please take advantage of that if you think that that's something that you could benefit from. And if you're attending more than this, yes. Michelle says, can you share the link for the classroom checkup resource and supporting responding behavior? We can absolutely do that in the check. It should be linked in the slides, and I apologize if it's not, but we'll make sure that we do that. But go ahead and take a look at that Ashland credit. I think it's worth it. If you're going to sit in these networks anyways, you might as well get college credit for it. I think it's a great idea. And then our last session our next session is November 3rd. If you have registered for this session, you don't have to do anything. You just have to show up. It will be the same Zoom link. And again, you don't have to do any registration. If you know anybody that has not registered that would like to attend, they would have to register because they were not on our original list. So they would need the link and they would need to register. But if you are here today registered, all you need to do is show up on November 3rd at 9 for this meeting. Rachel did post the bit.ly. The bit.ly should have all the live links, including the classroom checkup and the other resource. If it's not, I will make sure that I go in and update that so that as long as you guys access that bit.ly, I can still change those links and you'll have access to those. Okay. We also do want to remind you, Mike shamelessly plugged our 8 with 8 podcast at the beginning. I will shamelessly plug it again. We are starting we have 6 seasons, I believe, that are done that you can go back and listen to any of those on your favorite podcast player. We will be starting a new season this year that will be PBIS focused. And our theme is going to be how PBIS relates to all the other initiatives and other things that you're doing in your building. So we're going to be providing PBIS connections to things like trauma-informed care, academics, all kinds of things that PBIS is, SEL, social emotional learning, all of those kinds of things. And those will start dropping at the end of October, I believe. But you can listen to any previous season on there. And there's our socials are up there too. As well as our website, which is about to go under a huge revamp. So that may be changing and looking a lot differently very, very shortly. And so those are all of those things. So if you haven't had a minute to take that link to the survey, please make sure you do that. We really want to hear from you what you need in this network. I know it's only an hour a couple times a year, but if there's something really in particular that you need, please let us know in that survey. And I am going to stop my screen share. I am going to throw it to Mike, who is going to share the results of our survey from this morning. And he can talk through that. Thanks, Mike.
Can you see the results yet?
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, full disclosure, everybody. I wanted to create a slick survey using a free app called Opinion Stage, and it's really user-friendly. But I used the basics. So what happened was you're only allowed to have so many responses per month. This was a great little tool to use. I could have used a little Google form and a Google survey, but this was pretty slick. And I thought this could be a tool that someone could use because it looks like that clickbait that you find on Facebook where it asks, what's your opinion? It could be something that you could use in your classroom if you're looking at votes for a classroom reward for recognizing what do you prefer, so on and so forth. But full disclosure, in practicing today's presentation, I made a mock survey that I had our colleagues fill out, so that used up some of my responses today. But the max you can have per month is 25 on the free program. But today we were only allowed to capture 15 votes because I was very ambitious earlier this week trying to test the program to see how it works. But it looks to me like we have a lot of people in our network that like to be taken down to PBIS country. Looks like we have a tie for our pop music and our rockin' SST-ators. And then we have absolutely no one interested in podcasts. And some of you may have taken the poll and it may not be reflecting your input, but maybe next time, if we ever do a poll like this again, after our shameless plugs for our 8 with 8 podcast, we'll see those numbers go up. But thought this would be a fun little way to break the ice and maybe use a new tool, a different kind of format. And it's called Opinion Stage, OPINION Stage, really easy to use. The caveat is with the free, you can only get so many responses per month. And I'm signing out, DJ Mike Kaschak with your musical moods. Have a great day.